7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farrow.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Hi, Andrew Pearce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every weekend, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Bigger and better, starting at 8 p.m. Friday and Saturday.
Can't be too safe. Bring it on. Has there ever been a more innuendo feature?
And Sundays, we're on at 9.
It's ridiculous.
Just get on with it. Maybe you should get a proper job.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
My thanks to the brilliant Nigel Farage, who returns tomorrow at 7. Busy one tonight, it's Mark Dolan looking after the 8 o'clock show all of this week. Coming up, in my big opinion, 3 years on from Brexit, my verdict. Also, do the Tories face extinction at the next election? Could they disappear altogether? We'll ask top academic and expert on the Red Wall, Professor Matthew Goodwin. What he has to say will not make for happy listening for Rishi Sunak. As it emerges, the British Army have been spying on COVID critics. Has the pandemic destroyed free speech in this country? We'll speak to one of the journalists targeted by the military. Toby Young joins us shortly. And on its 3-year anniversary, and with Sir Keir Starmer tipped to enter number 10 in a couple of years' time, is Brexit safe in Labour's hands? Do you trust Labour with Brexit? We'll debate that with the leader of UKIP, Neil Hamilton. Plus, more reaction on 3 years of Brexit from the leader of the SDP, William Clouston. A busy show, but my verdict on Brexit next. First, the headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Mark, thank you. Good evening to you. The top story on GB News tonight. Tens of thousands of teachers in England and Wales have joined the UK's largest education union to take part in strikes tomorrow. The National Education Union says 40,000 school staff signed up in a fortnight. Tomorrow is the first of 7 days of strikes by the union in February and March amid a pay dispute. The Education Minister, Nick Gibb, described the strikes as disruptive.
It is disappointing that the NEU has decided to go ahead with these strikes when we are still discussing issues of pay and workload and other issues very constructively. Even yesterday we were having those discussions, and strikes are disruptive to children's education, particularly after the 2 years of disruption during the COVID pandemic, and it's disrupting to parents and families as well.
A new report by the International Monetary Fund is predicting a negative outlook for the UK's economy. It forecasts that the UK's gross domestic product, or GDP, will shrink by 0.6% over the coming year, even though in October the IMF had expected growth of 0.3%. The Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, says Britain, however, outperformed many other financial forecasts last year, despite higher interest rates and tighter government budgets. The Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, though, is blaming the IMF's stance on 13 years of Conservative economic policy.
The UK economy has got huge potential, and yet the government is failing to seize that initiative. And we see today, with these forecasts from the IMF, with the UK now at the bottom of the league table for growth, both this year and next, the government needs to be doing so much more to fulfil the potential of the UK economy.
Lancashire Police say they have now found and are speaking to a key witness they were seeking earlier on in the day in the search for a missing mother of two. 45-year-old Nicola Bully was last seen walking her dog by the River Wyre on Friday. Her mobile phone was later found on a bench on a conference work call, and her dog was discovered running loose nearby. And the Princess of Wales says it's essential to know what's needed to help the future generation become happy, healthy adults. Launching her new early years campaign called Shaping Us, the Princess says she hopes to help people understand how early childhood affects later life and adulthood. Kensington Palace says the importance of early years development will be a key focus for Kate for the rest of her life. That's the news. You're up to date on TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Back now to Mark Dolan.
This is Mark Dolan in the 8 o'clock slot all this week. Coming up, do the Tories face extinction at the next election? As it emerges, the British Army have been spying on Covid critics. Has the pandemic destroyed free speech in this country? And on its 3-year anniversary, is Brexit safe in Labour's hands? A lot to get through. But first, my big opinion. Forget about the COVID-19 virus. The illness which has gripped the nation most over the last 3 years is Brexit derangement syndrome. The irrational hatred of a democratic decision by a population to exit a political bloc. Why does it fall upon me, somebody that voted Remain in 2016, to defend Brexit? Well, it's not a problem. Defend Brexit, I absolutely will. Now, it's clear that some businesses have struggled with the transition and many have given up exporting to the EU altogether. Issues, particularly the Northern Ireland Protocol, have not been ironed out. Growth has been hit and the full opportunities of Brexit have not yet been seized upon. But Brexit is not one moment and it's not one date in the calendar. It's an opportunity, it's an idea and it's a work in progress. Brexit is a journey and one, I believe, that is well worth taking. But let's do it properly. Let's have a full-fat Brexit, not half in, half out, which is akin to being half pregnant. It's my view that Brexit needs a new PR department because it has been chronically undersold. Laughably, its critics link our current economic problems, raging inflation, recession and eye-watering debt, as being down to Brexit. People making that link are either mad or lying or a combination of the two. Happy to overlook the fact that we borrowed £500 billion and shut the economy down on and off for 2.5 years in an attempt to stop a seasonal respiratory virus. The most important aspect of Brexit is that it was delivered. The will of the people was respected. Attempts by politicians and powerful media figures to push for a second referendum, including the cervix-free leader of the opposition, Sir Keir Starmer, would, I believe, have created a democratic crisis the likes of which we've never seen. Constitutional pandemonium and probably civil unrest on the streets. Brexit was an immediate insurance policy against ever closer union and membership of a United States of Europe. It was an insurance policy against paying for a sovereign debt crisis on the continent, which I fear is coming. Brexit was an insurance policy against a single European army. Look at the dreadful EU response to Ukraine in its early stages, whilst Britain led the way. Brexit was an instant insurance policy against payments of £20 billion a year, which over 2 decades amounts to the entire cost of the pandemic. Brexit was an insurance policy against free movement, against a one-size-fits-all trade policy, and against having the euro, something which Tony Blair dangerously flirted with and which Gordon Brown heroically thwarted. Brexit critics have seized on today's news from the IMF that Britain will be the worst performing economy in the G7 this year, with lower growth than even war-torn Russia. Now, I don't buy their gloomy outlook. Yes, we've got problems, big time, and it's going to be a rough year. But as with COVID modelling during the pandemic, recent economic modelling from the IMF and others has been about as accurate as a Nadeem Zahawi tax return. 3 years on, and Brexit is all to play for. To believe in Brexit is to believe in Britain. Don't let the doubters win. Let's head over to our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, who's at the Completing Brexit event in central London. Hi, Liam. What's the mood in that room?
Well, Mark, here I am from the centre of Westminster, very much in think tank land in Tufton Street. What's going on behind me is the launch of this pamphlet, Completing Brexit, a Democratic Necessity. And inside are members of the European Foundation. You've got former cabinet ministers in there like Ian Duncan-Smith. The proceedings are being led by Bill Cash, the Tory MP for Stone, who's been very much a campaigner for leaving the European Union. John Redwood's in there, David Jones, all kinds of Theresa Villiers, former Northern Ireland Secretary. These are all MPs, past and present, who have rammed Brexit through over the years. These are the so-called Spartans, the MPs who, in the heat of those Brexit battles during the 3 years that followed the 2016 referendum, when Parliament was arguing about whether or not Brexit should actually happen, these are the MPs who stood their ground and actually made it happen. And I wouldn't say there's an air of celebration inside. There is instead an air of stoic determination. These MPs, they tell me that in their view, the media is stacked against leaving the European Union. They think the IMF projections that came out today saying that the UK is going to grow much more slowly than other G7 economies over this year are misguided. They point out that the IMF's often been wrong in the past, and they point out that since June 2016, since that celebrated referendum date celebrated by some people, that the UK has grown actually faster than Germany and that it outpaced most of the G7 economies last year, stuff that you don't hear mentioned by many broadcasters. So there's grim determination inside here tonight, Mark, knowing that there's lots of people out there who see Brexit as something that the UK should be ashamed of.
Listen, I'll let you go and have a mojito with Ian Duncan-Smith in just a moment. But can I finally ask you, Liam, whether you would agree with me that Brexit has been undersold? Now, I voted Remain in 2016 because I felt there would be short to medium-term economic impact. I stand by that, but I've mentioned in my big opinion that Brexit's a journey, it's a work in progress. Can it ultimately be successful for this country?
Well, I would say, as a professional economist, I would say that it can be, and it is a journey rather than an event. Since that referendum in mid-2016, we had 3 years of rows, of course. Then we had a transition period. And then almost as soon as the transition period was over, when the UK left the single market and the customs union, the main constructs, the legal constructs of the EU, we then had the COVID pandemic. And since then, we've had the biggest conflict on the European landmass since 1945. So I don't think anyone really knows how Brexit has impacted the UK so far. What I would say is that the growth figures haven't been too bad since we left the European Union formally, though that's not something that you often heard said by broadcasters. I'd also say, actually, Mark, that a lot of people feel that this issue is being overblown and that our relationship with the European Union needs time to bed down. You know, we were members of the European Union from 1973, then we had a referendum in 75, of course, a post-joining referendum, and then we didn't have enough of the referendum till 2016. So I think there's an awful lot of people out there who feel that this constant agitation by a lot of the Remainers, or the Remoaners, some people call them, is just not on. We should all get behind Brexit, Leavers and Remainers alike, and try and make the best of it for the good of our country. And there's an awful lot of people in this postcode, Mark, in SW1, in Westminster, who still want to reverse Brexit. And that's what the people in the building behind me are pushing against.
Not on my watch. Liam Halligan, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Let's get further reaction to 3 years of Brexit with the leader of UKIP, one of the best-known politicians in the country, of course, former Conservative MP Neil Hamilton. Good evening, Neil. Brexit's not perfect, but it's with us now. And it's important that we acknowledge this moment and celebrate the fact that the democratic will of the British people was fulfilled and acknowledged.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. But when you look at the substance of what we've done with Brexit, that's extraordinarily disappointing. 7 years now since the referendum, what have we got to show for it? What differences have been made by this government in the last 3 years, let alone in the last 7? And the answer is a fat zero. We haven't controlled our borders. We haven't diverged from the EU in terms of rules and regulations, hardly at all. And we've not used the independence, which we fought so hard to achieve through the referendum. So, this government spent half its time since 2016 trying to sabotage Brexit when Theresa May was trying to keep us in the customs union, the single market. And then after Boris achieved Brexit in name, he then did absolutely nothing with it. And Rishi Sunak, although he voted for Brexit, is the very epitome of a kind of globalist international banker, conformist, who doesn't want to make waves, doesn't want to upset the international elites and so on. We need a freebooting Prime Minister who's going to take this by the scruff of the neck and take advantage of the opportunities we've got in innovation. Europe is a declining part of the world economy. 40 years ago, it was 30% of world GDP. Now it's lower than 15% and declining rapidly, relatively, because other parts of the world, China, India, and so on, are growing so fast, and Europe isn't growing at all. Britain needs to look out into the wider world, not inwardly, to a continent which, in historical terms, is in decline. And all those Conservative politicians who are in 55 Tufton Street with Liam Halligan, why aren't they in the government? They're the real Brexiteers. They're the ones who should be driving this campaign, and yet they've been excluded. And I think that says it all, actually. The government is being run by people who don't really believe in Brexit, like Jeremy Hunt, for instance, who was a massive Remainiac. And he is probably the most important member of the government, maybe even more important than Rishi Sunak in practical terms. So, although he haven't got very high hopes, I'm afraid.
No, Neil, Jeremy Hunt does seem to have changed his tune on Brexit, but do those words ring hollow is the question. I'll be asking whether Labour can be trusted with Brexit later in the hour. But Neil, notwithstanding your misgivings about the current situation, do we, as it stands, have a that'll do Brexit? Have we got a good enough Brexit? Is what we have now better than Remain?
Oh, that's certainly true. And we're outside the EU institutions. We haven't had to make contributions to the EU budget of 20 billion a year. As Jacob Rees-Mogg has been pointing out, we haven't had to contribute nearly 200 billion to the EU bailout fund for the costs of the pandemic and so on. So, yes, of course, there are massive benefits, even though we've not used many of the powers that we've reacquired since we officially left the EU. Nevertheless, we have the freedom to use them, which we didn't have before. So in many respects, we're better off, even though the government has not made the sort of use of the opportunities that I would like them to.
Neil, do come and see us again in the studio soon. You were the man to speak to tonight, of course, one of the founding fathers of Brexit and, of course, the leader of UKIP. My thanks to Neil Hamilton. Coming up, if a Labour government is on the cards, which many think it is, Could a Labour government be trusted with Brexit? Also, as it emerges, the British Army have been tracking COVID critics. Has the pandemic destroyed free speech in this country? But next, do the Tories face extinction at the next election? And I mean wipeout, never to return. We'll speak to Professor Matthew Goodwin, an expert on British politics and, in particular, the Red Wall. He's got some explosive views, and he's next.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons? I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back. Eamon Holmes, back on the TV with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes. Already to bless.
Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind, and we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance.
Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236, and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio,
with the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the show. Coming up, Toby Young and William Clouston, the leader of the SDP, celebrating and reflecting on 3 years of Brexit. This is Mark Dolan with you all this week at 8. Now, a recent poll, courtesy of Electoral Calculus, suggests the Conservatives may only win, wait for it, 45 seats at the next election. 45 seats, making them little bigger than the Lib Dems. It would be their lowest performance on record. So just how bad could it get for Rishi Sunak? Do the Tories face extinction at the next election? To debate this, I'm delighted to welcome an expert on British politics and the Red Wall, Professor Matthew Goodwin, whose excellent Substack articles can be found at matthewjgoodwin.org. Good evening, Matthew.
Good evening.
Matthew, what is the worst case scenario for the Conservatives in the hypothetical scenario of a 2024 election? What do you reckon? Autumn 24, most likely, perhaps spring. What's the worst that can happen?
Well, the worst, Mark, as you say, is a total wipeout on the scale of 1997, if not even worse. And if you look at the numbers that I'm looking at in our People poll each week, it does indeed look like the Conservatives are currently heading in that direction. Rishi Sunak's favourability ratings, his leadership ratings, are heading south. Only 23% of the country feel favourably towards him. The Conservatives have lost ownership of the economy. They're not seen as levelling up. They're no longer seen as bringing control to Britain's borders. And more generally, they're no longer seen as having much of a purpose. So the challenge facing Sunak is enormous. The voters have clearly tuned out. Whenever I mention the Conservative Party in focus groups, they roll their eyes and are frequently saying they're sick of the party being in office for this long and Britain having this many problems. So I do actually think that this is pretty much as close as you can get to being an existential crisis for the Conservative Party, and one that I suspect may yet come to deliver an almighty shock at the next election.
Now, Rishi Sunak, as you well know, Matthew, has a 5-point plan. Boost growth, cut the debt, fix the NHS waiting lists, halve inflation and stop the boats. Will delivery on those issues, or at least progress on those issues, move the dial for him? Because I do think he's identified the 5 key areas. At least he knows what he's got to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think as I mentioned in the Substack this week, if you talk to people in and around Rishi Sunak, they will tell you that their only path to victory is what they call narrow but steep. So they are essentially convinced that if Sunak delivers on these 5 pledges, cutting inflation, reducing the number of small boats, cutting waiting lists in hospitals and reducing inflation, that he will essentially be able to say to the country, look, things are improving. We're over the worst. Don't let the Labour Party ruin it. That will essentially be the strategy for 24. The problem, though, as you know better than most listening to your viewers and listeners, is a lot of the country simply don't believe he's going to do that. They don't think the government is going to stop the small boats. They don't think the government is levelling up the country. And inflation may fall. Indeed, it is already falling, but it's unlikely to fall to the levels that Sunak is probably going to need it to fall to in order for people to feel a tangible difference to their weekly shop and to their energy bills and so on. So, you know, the mountain facing him is simply enormous. No party has ever come back from this low in the polls to win the next election. And his only hope, as I've told people around him, is that essentially the external climate begins to change in his favour.
Was that the Prime Minister? Did it say Rishi Sunak mob? If so, I'll let you take that call.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Unfortunately, not.
Not the red phone from number 10. There is, I think, an elephant in the room, though, on this, Matthew, and that's the popularity or otherwise of Starmer. Because I can't think there are too many Starmer fans out there. His great selling point is that he's not the leader of the Conservative Party, who are now so discredited. Given that our politics have become increasingly presidential, could the Starmer factor be an issue at the next election for Labour? The fact that there isn't any great momentum behind him as a personality?
Yeah, I think that's the only thing really that Sunak is clinging to at this point, that Starmer's not cutting through in the way that Tony Blair did in the 1990s. And the comparison to the 1990s is misleading for that reason. Blair had incredibly strong leadership ratings. Starmer does not. He's still really in the low single digits. Blair was plus 50. I mean, Blair was in a different galaxy when it came to his leadership ratings. And Sunak will be pointing to this and hoping, praying that Starmer has not cut through. Otherwise, he is in serious trouble.
Do you buy that old adage that a week is a long time in politics and therefore 2 years is an eternity? Has Sunak got enough time to turn this around, or is it already game over?
I think it's not game over. I think potentially if the external climate begins to move in his favour, if the markets and inflation and the boats, if all of that stuff begins to change, he's got a chance. I mean, no one would look at the last 3 years in British politics and say, you know, we can guarantee what's going to happen 18 months from now. You know, we've just gone through a pandemic. We've got a war in Ukraine. Who knows what's coming around the corner? And Sunak, you know, will be hoping that much of that external environment changes in his favour, that the economy begins to improve and stabilise, the UK outpaces the forecasts. And if all of that stuff comes together, he's going to have a chance. He's going to have a shot. But at the moment, as we've discussed, the fundamentals are really working against him, and that's the real problem.
Briefly, a final thought, Matthew. Will issues around extreme political correctness be a factor? The so-called culture wars at the next election, wokeism, the fact that Keir Starmer has found it difficult to define a woman, and I think that he's tied himself in knots about whether only women can have a cervix. Could this be a factor, or is the woke stuff marginal?
It depends if the Conservatives want to make it a factor, and currently it appears they don't really want to do that. Now, I've argued that actually a lot of those cultural questions are really important to people. They want to talk about women's rights. They want to talk about what we're teaching children. They want to talk about how we think of British history. They want to talk about why they want to defend British culture. Now, the Conservatives have backed off from that fight. And if they continue to do so, then it will be another easy area for Labour to score points. If instead they want to get involved in those debates, then I suspect actually they'll find a pretty receptive audience, particularly among many of their core voters who are looking for a reason, desperate to find a reason to vote Conservative.
Matthew Goodwin's weekly Substack articles are free and always required reading. I'll be honest, he does half my homework for me. Just go to matthewjgoodwin.org. Thank you, Matthew, and we'll catch up again soon, I hope.
Thank you. Thanks.
Now, coming up, if there's going to be a Labour government, can Labour be trusted with Brexit? Or would we slowly go back into the bosom of the EU? I'll discuss that with the leader of the SDP Brexit-supporting William Coulston. And as it emerges, the British Army have been tracking COVID critics. Has the pandemic destroyed free speech in this country? A journalist targeted by the military. Toby Young joins us. I'll also be asking Toby why the government aren't boosting the under-50s anymore. What's going on? We'll discuss that next.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions. I have no time for cultural totalitarianism. We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every weekend, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Bigger and better, starting at 8 p.m. Friday and Saturday.
Can't be too safe.
Bring it on!
Has there ever been a more innuendo feature?
And Sundays, we're on at 9.
It's ridiculous. Just get on with it. Maybe you should get a proper job.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. If a Labour government is on the cards, can Labour be trusted with Brexit? We'll discuss that with the leader of the SDP, William Clouston, live in the studio in just a few minutes. But first, this is a worrying story. Big Brother Watch released an exposé the other day on the shady dealings of the 7-7 Brigade, a unit of the British Army tasked with non-lethal psychological warfare, who, despite operating only against foreign powers and extremists, were deployed by the government during the COVID pandemic. We've spoken to the MOD a few times today, in which they categorically denied that individuals were spied on or that they had Stasi-style dossiers compiled on them, but that they'd collected information on narratives counter to official advice, asking the likes of Twitter to flag such content and advising the headsheds on how to counter the threat to the government. They claim this did not impact anyone's ability to discuss and debate issues freely. Well, that sounds a little fishy to me. So let's speak to one of the most prominent lockdown skeptics, Toby Young, who was doubtless in their crosshairs, and he joins us in the studio. Toby, what do you know, and are you on a list?
Well, this investigation, the reason we know this is because Big Brother Watch have just published a report. They're a civil rights campaigning group, a report called the Ministry of Truth. And about 6 months ago, they contacted me and said, will you submit a subject access request to various Whitehall departments that have been working with a number of shadowy agencies, often staffed by former members of the security services, of which the 77th Brigade is one. There are about half a dozen. Will you submit subject access requests to see if your activities, your social media posts, have been monitored by any of these agencies? Because we think that many people, including journalists, are being monitored by them. And so I thought, yeah, that's pretty unlikely. I'm not an enemy of the state. Why would they be monitoring me? They can't surely just be monitoring people who are critical of government policy. That would be an inappropriate use of these, security agencies. But it turned out they were monitoring me, not just me, but Julia Hartley-Brewer, Peter Hitchens, Carl Hennigan, the Oxford Professor.
That's a stellar list, isn't it?
Evidence-based medicine.
I'm slightly jealous not to be on the list.
Well, you might be. I mean, if you'd submit, you can still submit a subject access request to, say, DCMS and discover whether, in fact, they were monitoring you along with the rest of us. If you, you were quite a prominent lockdown critic yourself, critic of masking, you might well have been monitored.
Why does this matter? Isn't it the job of the authorities to keep an eye on misinformation, and won't they gather up a few innocent people along the way?
Well, I mean, I think the way in which government ministers rationalised this use of these agencies to essentially monitor the activities of their critics. And by monitor, I mean look at stuff in the public domain, their journalism, their social media activity, not tap their phones or look at their WhatsApp messages. But I think the reason they rationalise that to themselves by saying they're not just critics of government policy, they are critics of what's in the best interests of British society. And if they say that masks don't work, or that we should hesitate before taking the mRNA vaccines, or if they say that more people will be harmed than lockdowns than saved, then that's misinformation or disinformation. They came up with this category, which was mis/disinformation. So even though it obviously wasn't straightforward disinformation, people like me weren't foreign actors trying to undermine electoral contests for to advance my country's interests. But by merging these two categories, they decided that if you criticised the government's pandemic response, you were trafficking in misinformation, and that meant you were guilty of mis/disinformation, and that meant it was perfectly appropriate for these agencies to monitor you and pass on to officials and government ministers what you were getting up to. But the really sinister thing, Mark, isn't that they were merely monitoring people like me and Julia Hartley-Brewer and Peter Hitchens and Carl Hennigan and others. They were also monitoring members of their own party. So David Davis, for instance, pretty shocking, prominent former Home Secretary. But after, what these agencies would do is they'd monitor people's social media activity in particular, and if they thought that you'd posted something that breached the terms of service of Facebook or Twitter, they would point that out to their masters in these government departments, and the ministers or their intermediaries would then use their trusted flagger status to contact Facebook and Twitter and point out that this particular post had breached their terms of service. Hint, hint, ban this person or shadow ban this person or suspend them.
Would you really go that far? Because certainly in the States there's growing evidence from the Twitter files that the Biden administration picked on individuals like the journalist Alex Berenson, who was calling out vaccine risks and he was a lockdown skeptic. And the White House effectively said, can you sort this man out? Can you do a job on him? And Twitter suspended his account permanently. You don't think that the British authorities have gone that far, do you?
I'm pretty confident that that is exactly what they've been doing. And this Big Brother Watch report, the Ministry of Truth, is really the British version
of the Twitter files. So you think through the military, through the army, that the government have effectively been cancelling people online? That's your allegation?
Not just the 77th Brigade, but some of these other shadowy organisations like the Counter-Disinformation Unit in DCMS. Yes.
So therefore, number 10 has been no better than the White House in the course of this pandemic, is your contention?
I don't doubt that with these reports in hand, in which some people were flagged as having posted stuff breaching the terms of service of social media platforms like Twitter and Facebook, officials within these departments then used their trusted flagger status to contact executives at these social media companies and point this out. I don't think they demanded that they take down this particular person's account or shadow ban them, but they pointed it out, and if it's a government official pointing it out, in all likelihood, Twitter and Facebook responded, as they did in the United States when they were contacted by officials of the Biden administration. So, and in the case, my subject access request, it revealed a report to the Counter-Disinformation Unit at DCMS in which it said that I tweeted something about an anti-vaccine mandate petition, a vaccine passport petition in France receiving 1.2 million signatures, and it got a lot of traffic on Twitter, and they flagged this up and they said, we don't think you should flag this one to Twitter because there are freedom of speech implications. In other words, don't try and get this guy banned because he set up the Free Speech Union, he's a reasonably well-known journalist, might backfire. But for people without my status, without my profile, who haven't set up pro-free speech organisations, the implication was, go ahead, they're fair game. Get them banned.
Yes, and that's actually the misunderstanding or the mischaracterisation of cancel culture. People say there's no cancel culture. Ricky Gervais is still on stage. But actually, it's the people that don't have the big platform who get cancelled or who self-censor. What are the implications for free speech in this country, given the fact that these rather draconian mechanisms have kicked in?
Well, I think
they're not going to. The state won't row back in this role now, will it? These departments will continue to operate. Surely.
No, and it's the UK isn't isolated either. As you said, it happened in America. We know it happened in Canada. It happened in Holland. Under the pretext of protecting the public from disinformation or misinformation, there's been an enormous amount of overreach on the part of governments. They've said they've used agencies like the Counter-Disinformation Unit, like the 77th Brigade, to monitor the so-called misinformation and disinformation of critics of policies like vaccine passports, lockdowns, and it extends to climate change too. If you're critical of climate change, I think that falls within the remit of some of these shadowy agencies. They'll flag that up to their departmental chiefs as well.
Shall we indulge you? Do you want to give me a couple of examples of outrageous misinformation that you've peddled, which has turned out to be true?
Well, I was, let's see.
Excess deaths? That's not looking good, is it?
I mean, the link between excess deaths
you'd expect excess deaths to be lower now after lockdowns and the vaccine, wouldn't you? That would be the point.
You would, and they're not, and it's not just here, it's a pattern repeated all over the world where they've rolled out the mRNA vaccines, and we don't know for sure that the cause of these excess deaths is because of the mRNA vaccines, but they're looking like a pretty likely suspect. But if that's precisely the kind of thing that if you were to say that on Twitter or Facebook, it might be flagged up by one of these agencies to a departmental official in the government, and you could end up being flagged to Twitter or Facebook and have your account suspended. And incidentally, Mark, my Facebook account is currently suspended. Now, I don't know if that was at the behest of a government official, but having read the Big Brother Watch report, I wouldn't be surprised.
News just in, you've just been flagged by GB News senior management as one of our best commentators.
Thanks, Mark.
Which I think is also quite worrying, I'll be honest with you. By the way, for the avoidance of doubt, the government and the health authorities are very clear, abundantly clear, that the vaccine is safe and effective and is arguably the most tested vaccine in history. Now, going back to the government military censorship story, a government spokesman has said online disinformation is a serious threat to the UK, which is why during the pandemic we brought together expertise from across government to monitor disinformation about COVID. These units used publicly available data, including material shared on social media platforms, to assess UK disinformation trends and narratives. They did not target individuals or take any action that could impact anyone's ability to discuss and debate issues freely. Now, coming up, with a Labour government looking more likely by the day, can Sir Keir Starmer be trusted with Brexit? Is Brexit safe in Labour's hands? I'll be discussing that with the leader of the SDP. Live in the studio, William Clouston's next.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison? I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance.
Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
To believe in Brexit is to believe in Britain. That's the topic of my big opinion, which you can find on our Twitter feed at GB News right now. With odds on a Labour victory at the next election shortening by the day, what will the future hold for Britain's relationship with the EU? And is Brexit safe in Labour's hands? To discuss this, I'm delighted to welcome the leader of the SDP, William Clouston. Hello, William. Great to have you in the studio.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Well, simple question. Can Labour be trusted with Brexit? Because we know that there are many on the opposition benches who would like to see more alignment, possibly a customs union or even single market membership, which has been recommended by the London Mayor, Sadiq Khan.
They'd love all that, Mark, but I would step back and ask, can Brexit be trusted with the Tories? I mean, the Tories convened a Brexit coalition, and it had parts of it that were on the left and parts of it on the right. But the dominant theme, the dominant idea in it was their vision really was a sort of buccaneering, free trading type
Singapore on Thames.
Yeah, none of them knew anything about Singapore, Mark, for a start. I mean, that was a major problem. I'd take that, actually. A little bit of, public transport, housing. It's a sort of social market model. Singapore. But no, their only vision on the Tory side was unilateral free trade. And my problem with that is that you couldn't really invent a worse prescription for Britain's problems. We have a massive trade problem. We're constantly producing these trade deficits, and we're constantly selling things off to pay for the imports that we enjoy. So unless you can face up to that, and I see absolutely no hint that many Tories understand it, I don't think the Labour Party understand it either, unless you can actually get to the root of what the problem is, you're consuming more than you're producing, and deal with it and reindustrialise, start producing one or two things. Unless you address that seriously, you're not serious. So I don't think, I mean, it's a tragedy, really. People were promised things that the Tories couldn't deserve. And actually, poor old Boris Johnson, actually, I think he convened a sort of Brexit coalition that he couldn't possibly make sense of in the Tory party or in the country. So it's in a mess. And just finally...
go on.
The other thing is immigration, because people wanted immigration dealing with mass immigration, mass migration, because they wanted British people trained for the jobs that we need. They didn't even do that for the health service. So the vision was wrong, and they didn't know what they were doing with it. So they've sort of mucked it up, I think.
However, just to interrupt you there, ultimately it's far from perfect. I was talking to Neil Hamilton earlier and suggesting it was a good enough Brexit, a that'll-do Brexit, given the fact that we're out. So the will of the British people was fulfilled. We've got, we're out of ever closer union, no euro, no single European army, 20 billion a year in payments. All the important stuff's been done on the watch of the Conservatives. So I just wonder whether it's Labour that should be a greater concern for Brexit supporters rather than the Tories. Because the Tories could never live with single market or customs union.
I agree.
They'll never swallow that. You wonder whether Labour might.
Oh, well, they would love to. I mean, most of the parliamentary Labour Party would have us back in.
And then what's the point? What's the point of single market? Because then you have free movement.
Yes.
What's the point in customs union? You don't have an independent trade policy.
Of course. Well, you could, yes. But even that's to get back to my point. I mean, I'm having a gripe at the Tories a little bit here. If you have an independent trade policy, what do you do with it? Well, their best idea was rush off and negotiate a lousy policy with Australia, which in the end you just won't have an upland sheep farming industry. You won't have that. The NFU, Minette Batters pointed that out. And then the trade deal with Japan, which Truss negotiated, was modelled to massively increase Japan's exports to us and increase ours by a little bit. So the bilateral trade deficit will increase. Insane. What are they doing? I mean, what do they want? So both. I mean, I don't trust the Labour Party on this because they didn't want it. But remember, Mark, actually, let's face it, no party wanted it, really. No party. The only party in the Commons that wanted this was the DUP.
Interesting, yeah, of course, and perhaps for existential reasons. What about the SDP? Is there any sense of buyer's regret in your ranks for Brexit? Any second thoughts for Brexit as a policy?
No, because the social democracy that we want would be completely impossible if you're inside the European Union. You can't do it. It's literally banned. And
so that would be, for example, state intervention in certain industries?
Keeping a steelworks open, banned. Building your own trains and locomotives here, if you wish, banned. intervention to create very cheap energy so you can reindustrialise, banned. So, no, I think a first-order thing, you've got to get out. It was right to get out. I don't criticise us for that. It was the right thing to do. But the model... I think it can be a dirty little secret inside the Brexit coalition that a lot of us on the sort of left-leaning side wanted a completely different thing. And as I say, go back to migration. That's a major problem for the Tories because they promised in the manifesto in 2019 to have a border that was secure, and they've utterly failed, and that's why they'll go down in flames in the polls.
Also, it's useful to have you here because I mentioned in my big opinion earlier that Brexit needs a new PR department. I'm its biggest champion. I voted Remain, but it falls on my shoulders to defend Brexit. Well, defend it I will, A, because I'm a Democrat, and B, because I think there are strong arguments for it. It's often mischaracterised as a right-wing idea. You are living proof that that's not true.
Well, there are 5, on the polling, on the data that we have, there's about 5.5 million people on the left out of the coalition, the 17 million that voted for it. So there was always a very good left-wing case for it. I think the Lexit case, as it's called, is the only one that makes any sense, because if we carry on with this open, unfettered, unilateral free trade, you just won't have any industry. You'll have a country that's just literally mired in debt, and we're not going to face up to...
What is Lexit?
Lexit, the left-wing...
I see. It's a new word I've got to learn.
No, it's not that
because
new.
We've had Brexit, we've had Megxit, now we've got Lexit.
Well, Lexit, it was Labour Leave and a few other people put it together, but it's the only sensible one.
It's a left-leaning social democrat Brexit.
Yes. Yeah. So, and it's the only one that makes any sense.
I did ask Neil Hamilton. I'll ask you as well. Notwithstanding its imperfections, would you take what we have today? As opposed to membership of the EU?
Of course I would, yes I would.
Today is better than Remain?
Yes, it is.
Why?
Because there are lots of other arguments about democracy. You're not the European Union, a fully integrated member of the European Union.
Yeah.
The ordinary voter cannot have any purchase, cannot elect and sack the people that make the decisions. So let's imagine you're Portuguese or Italian. Fully integrated. You go to the polls, Mark, and you want to vote, you don't have anyone, you have no contact with the people that make trade policy, monetary policy, industrial policy, or any of the other important things, immigration. It's all taken off the table, and that is totally undemocratic, unacceptable.
Lovely to have you in the studio.
Pleasure.
Do come and see us again soon, William.
Will do.
Thank you for your time, William.
Thank you.
Clouston is the leader of the SDP. I'm old enough to remember their first incarnation. And on William's watch, I'm confident that the next incarnation will be much more successful. Dan Wootton is next. Unmissable telly. Don't go anywhere.
Hi there, I'm Aidan McGiven. It's turning increasingly windy in the north, and in the far north, the risk of gales during the next 24 hours before later Wednesday, the wind and a lot of the showers ease away. What we're seeing at the moment is a north-south contrast with high pressure closer to the south. It's mainly dry. A cold front has cleared the cloud. But further north, tightly packed isobars, strong wind, blustery showers continuing across Scotland, Northern Ireland into northern England during the night. And those showers falling as snow over the hills and mountains of Scotland. But we've also got the gale force wind peaking around the early hours of Wednesday. 60, 70, perhaps 80 mile per hour wind gusts for exposed coasts of northern Scotland could cause disruption. It's a cold night in the north, 3 or 4 Celsius. Below that, over hills, but further south, 5 to 7 Celsius. Enough of a wind to prevent a widespread frost. And actually a bright start to the south first thing. That's where the best of the sunshine will be, I think, through Wednesday. Areas of cloud filtering through Northern Ireland into south and west Scotland, as well as northern England, bringing some steady rain for a time, whilst things brighten up in the northeast of Scotland. The wind and the showers easing here. A little less cold in the north on Wednesday, 7 or 8 Celsius. Further south, not quite as mild as Tuesday, 10 or 11 Celsius. But a cloudy end to the day for most. Now we've got this next weather system moving through, bringing some steady rain across Northern Ireland, Scotland, Northern England on Wednesday night. That will keep things frost-free, but it is a damp start to Thursday. In the northwest of Scotland. Further south, clear spells overnight, but it will be a generally cloudy picture for Wales and the southwest. Again, keeping things frost-free, but I think greyer skies across the board on Thursday compared with the last couple of days and into Wednesday. Now for northern Scotland, further steady rain, heaviest over northwest Highlands, and that rain's going to continue through much of Thursday as well as into Friday. But for the rest of the UK, for many places, it is mostly dry and it's warming up.
We We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
and YouView Channel 236.